The snow was falling harder than the weather forecast had predicted, each flake a tiny accusation against the warmth I'd abandoned inside my car. I should have been home an hour ago, should have been sitting by the fire with the rest of them, but something had made me take the long way around Maple Street. Maybe it was guilt. Maybe it was the nagging feeling that I'd forgotten something important. That's when I saw her. A small figure hunched against the Hendersons' fence, barely visible through the swirling white. According to YouTube analytics, 99.3% of viewers are not subscribed. That's a huge number. By subscribing the channel that is completely free, you'll help support the channel and never miss fresh content. At first, I thought it was a bundle of old clothes someone had thrown out. But then I saw the familiar blue scarf, the one she'd knitted herself last winter, the one with the slightly uneven stitches that she'd been so proud of. "Grandma," I whispered, my breath fogging the windshield. I pulled over so fast the car skidded on the icy road. The engine was still running when I threw open the door and stumbled through the knee-deep snow toward her. She was sitting on the ground, her back pressed against the wooden fence, her thin coat soaked through and clinging to her frail frame. "Grandma Rose?" I dropped to my knees beside her, my heart hammering against my ribs. Her lips were blue, nearly the same color as her scarf, and her eyes were closed. For one terrifying moment I thought I was too late. But then her eyelids fluttered open, and she looked at me with those same sharp green eyes that had watched me grow up, that had taught me to bake cookies and tie my shoes and stand up for myself. "Emma." Her voice was barely a whisper, cracked and hollow. "What are you doing here, sweetheart?" "What am I doing here?" I pulled off my coat and wrapped it around her shoulders. "What are you doing here?" "Grandma, you're freezing. How long have you been outside?" She tried to smile, but her teeth were chattering too hard. I was waiting for the bus, to go to your mother's house, for Christmas dinner." My blood turned to ice, and it had nothing to do with the weather. "Grandma, the buses stopped running 2 hours ago because of the storm, and didn't Mom pick you up?" The confusion in her eyes broke something inside my chest. "She was supposed to, wasn't she? I've been waiting." She looked around, as if seeing her surroundings for the first time. "How long have I been here?" I helped her to her feet, supporting most of her weight as we made our way back to my car. She felt so light, so fragile, like she might blow away with the next gust of wind. I cranked up the heat and pointed all the vents toward her while I pulled out my phone. "Let me call Mom," I said, but Grandma's hand shot out and grabbed my wrist with surprising strength. "No," she said firmly. "Don't call her yet. Please, Emma, just take me home first. Let me get warm and change clothes." There was something in her voice, something that made me put the phone away without arguing. I drove the 6 blocks to her small house in silence, listening to her teeth chatter and watching her rub her hands together in my peripheral vision. Inside her house, I helped her into dry clothes and made her a cup of hot tea with extra honey, the way she'd always made it for me when I was sick. She sat at her kitchen table, wrapped in the afghan I'd crocheted for her birthday last year, and slowly began to warm up. "Grandma," I said gently, sitting across from her, "tell me what happened today." She stared into her teacup for a long moment. "Your mother called this morning. She said she'd pick me up at 3 o'clock for dinner. I was ready by 2:30, sitting by the window, watching for her car." Her voice grew smaller. "She never came. Maybe she got held up by the weather." I called her house at 4:30. Grandma's eyes met mine, and I saw a hurt there that went deeper than the cold ever could. "Richard answered. Your stepfather," he said. She paused, as if the words were too heavy to lift. "He said they were having dinner, and that I must have misunderstood. That I was never invited." The teacup slipped from my numb fingers and shattered against the kitchen floor, but I barely heard it. "He said what?" "He said your mother was too busy to talk, and then he hung up." A single tear rolled down her weathered cheek. I thought, I thought maybe I had confused the date. Or maybe I really did misunderstand. So I decided to take the bus over there anyway, just in case. I stared at her, my mind reeling. My mother had definitely told me that Grandma Rose was coming to Christmas dinner. I'd even asked what I should bring for her, since she was diabetic and couldn't eat the regular desserts. Mom had said she'd take care of everything. Grandma, wait here. I stood up, glass crunching under my shoes. I need to make a phone call. I walked to the living room and dialed my mother's number with shaking fingers. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times. Hello? My mother's voice was warm and slightly slurred. She'd already started on the wine. Mom, it's Emma. Where's Grandma? Oh, hi, honey. Merry Christmas. Where are you? We're just sitting down to dinner. I'm asking where Grandma is. There was a pause, and I could hear laughter in the background. My stepfather Richard, my stepbrother Kyle, Kyle's new wife whose name I could never remember. What do you mean? Mom asked, but her tone had changed, become guarded. I mean Grandma Rose. Mom, your mother. You told me she was coming to dinner. Another pause. Oh, that. Well, Richard thought it would be better if it was just immediate family this year. You know how she gets, Emma. All those stories about the war, and she's been so forgetful lately. We thought it would be more peaceful. More peaceful. I repeated the words like they were foreign. Mom, I just found her sitting in the snow on Maple Street. She's been there for hours, waiting for a bus to come to your house. Oh. The word came out small and guilty. Oh no, I meant to call her and explain, but I got so busy with cooking, and Richard said, something dark and ugly unfurled in my chest. Richard said a lot of things to Grandma when she called, didn't he? Emma, you don't understand. She's been getting so confused lately, and the doctor said she has mild dementia, Mom. Mild. She's not incompetent. She's not a child. She's your mother. And you left her sitting in a snowstorm on Christmas because your husband decided she wasn't worth the inconvenience. That's not fair, Emma. You don't know what it's like. I hung up. I stood there in Grandma's living room, surrounded by her Christmas decorations, the small tree she'd put up hopefully, the cookies she'd baked for a family dinner she'd never been properly uninvited from, and felt something cold and hard settle in my stomach. This wasn't the first time. Over the past year, I'd noticed little things. Grandma mentioning that Mom hadn't called in weeks, plans that got canceled at the last minute, excuses about why Richard didn't feel comfortable with Grandma around. I'd chalked it up to normal family friction, the usual adjustments that came with Mom's second marriage. But this was different. This was deliberate cruelty. Emma? Grandma appeared in the doorway, still wrapped in her Afghan. Is everything all right, sweetheart? I looked at her, really looked at her. At 83, she was still sharp, still kind, still the woman who had raised me when Mom was too busy with her career to notice I existed. She'd taught me to drive, helped me with my homework, held me when I cried over my first broken heart. And now she was being discarded like yesterday's newspaper because she was inconvenient. Everything's fine, Grandma. I forced a smile. How would you like to have Christmas dinner with me tonight? Just the two of us? Her face lit up like a child's. I'd love that, Emma. But don't you have plans with your mother? No, I said firmly. I don't. We spent the evening together, sharing Chinese takeout and watching old Christmas movies. Grandma told me stories I'd heard 100 times before, and I laughed at all the right parts. She was tired but happy, her color returning as the warmth seeped back into her bones. But as I drove home that night, the seed of rage that had been planted in my chest began to grow. Over the next few days, I started making phone calls to Mom's neighbors, to Grandma's doctor, to the nursing home where my stepfather had been researching options for Grandma's care. The picture that emerged made me sick. Richard had been systematically isolating Grandma from the family for months. He'd convinced Mom that Grandma was declining rapidly and needed to be somewhere safe. He'd told the neighbors that the family was too overwhelmed to care for her properly. He'd even gone so far as to get quotes from several nursing facilities, not the nice ones, but the cheap ones that warehoused elderly people until they died. And the real kicker? Grandma's house, the house she'd lived in for 60 years, the house she'd paid off with her pension from the school district, was sitting on a piece of property that had become very valuable. Richard had been researching how to get power of attorney so they could sell it for her own good. I spent a week planning, a week researching, a week getting angrier. Then I started making my moves. First, I visited Grandma's lawyer, the same man who had handled Grandpa's estate 20 years ago. We updated her will, established a proper power of attorney with me as the primary, and set up a trust that would protect her assets. All perfectly legal, all perfectly valid. Next, I called Mom's church. The same church where Grandma had been a faithful member for decades. The church where she'd volunteered in the soup kitchen and organized charity drives and taught Sunday school. I explained the situation to Pastor Williams, painting a very clear picture of an elderly woman being abandoned by her family. Then I called the local news station. I'd done my research. The reporter I contacted, Sarah Chen, had done a series on elder abuse the year before. I sent her all the documentation I'd gathered, the nursing home quotes, the real estate research, the phone records showing that Mom had indeed promised to pick Grandma up for Christmas dinner. But the piece de resistance was my stepfather's own words. I'd recorded our phone conversation when I called him directly, pretending to be interested in his concerns about Grandma's well-being. He'd been more than happy to explain his reasoning, confident that he was speaking to someone who agreed with him. "The old bat's losing her marbles anyway," he'd said. "Catherine's too soft-hearted to see it, but Rose needs professional care. And honestly, we could all use the money from selling that house. Catherine's been supporting her for years, and it's not fair to our family." When I pointed out that Grandma had her own pension and savings, he'd laughed. "Barely enough to cover a decent nursing home. But that house is worth at least $400,000 in this market. It's really the responsible thing to do." I had every word. The story ran on a Thursday evening in mid-January. "Local family abandons elderly mother in snowstorm" was the headline, and it was accompanied by the security camera footage I'd obtained from the Hendersons showing Grandma sitting alone in the snow for hours. By Friday morning, it had gone viral. By Friday afternoon, Mom was calling me in tears. "Emma, how could you do this to me, to our family?" I was at work, but I'd been expecting the call. "I didn't do anything to you, Mom." I told the truth. "You made us look like monsters. Richard's business partners are calling him. Kyle's wife is humiliated. The church has asked us not to attend services until this blows over. How could you air our private business like this?" "Your private business?" I stood up from my desk and walked to the window overlooking the parking lot. "Mom, you left your own mother in a snowstorm, on Christmas, because your husband thought she was inconvenient. You don't understand." "I understand perfectly." My voice was calm, controlled. I'd practiced this conversation in my head a dozen times. "I understand that you chose a man over your own mother. I understand that you were planning to steal her house and warehouse her in some cheap nursing home. I understand that you forgot who you used to be." "Emma, please. You have to call them back. Tell them you exaggerated. Tell them." "Tell them what, Mom? That the security footage is fake? That Richard's recorded confession was doctored?" Silence. "You recorded Richard?" Her voice was barely a whisper. "Every word. About the nursing homes, About the house. About how Grandma is losing her marbles. I paused, letting that sink in. It's all in the story, Mom. Every detail. More silence. Then quietly. What do you want from us? I want you to remember that Grandma Rose is your mother. I want you to remember that she raised you when Dad died, that she worked 2 jobs to put you through college, that she babysat me for free every day after school because you couldn't afford daycare. My voice was getting stronger, more passionate. I want you to remember who you used to be before you married a man who sees your family as inconveniences to be managed. It's not that simple. It's exactly that simple. I turned away from the window. And I want you to know that Grandma is fine. She's safe. Her affairs are in order, and she has people who actually care about her well-being looking after her interests. What does that mean? It means she's not your problem anymore, Mom. Isn't that what you wanted? The fallout was swift and brutal. Richard's construction company lost 3 major contracts when the story went viral. Apparently, nobody wanted to do business with a man who would abandon his elderly mother-in-law in a snowstorm. Kyle and his wife moved out of state, claiming they couldn't handle the harassment from people who recognized them. Mom lost her job at the real estate office after her boss decided she was too controversial for client-facing work. The church didn't just ask them to stay away, they launched a formal investigation into Richard's treatment of Grandma, and Pastor Williams made sure everyone knew exactly what kind of people they were dealing with. But the most satisfying consequence was also the most unexpected. 3 weeks after the story broke, I got a call from an attorney representing the Hendersons, the neighbors whose fence Grandma had been leaning against. Apparently, they'd been so horrified by what had happened that they'd done some investigating of their own. It turned out that Richard had been telling people all over the neighborhood that Grandma was mentally incompetent and that the family was doing everything they could to get her proper care. He'd even suggested to several neighbors that they should be understanding if they saw her wandering around confused. The Hendersons had security cameras covering their entire property, and they'd been recording for months. They had footage of Richard visiting Grandma's house when she wasn't home, trying the doors and peering through windows. They had audio of him telling other neighbors that Grandma wouldn't be living there much longer. Most damning of all, they had footage from Christmas Day itself, showing Richard driving slowly past Grandma's house twice, clearly seeing her sitting in the snow at the bus stop and continuing on without stopping. The attorney was representing Grandma in a civil suit against Richard for elder abuse, neglect, and attempted fraud. The potential damages were significant. But that wasn't even the best part. The best part came 6 months later, when Grandma Rose and I were sitting on her front porch, watching the sunset and drinking lemonade. "Emma," she said quietly, "I need to tell you something." I looked at her, concerned. Over the past months, her dementia had progressed slightly, but she was still herself most of the time. "What is it, Grandma?" She smiled, and there was something mischievous in her green eyes, something I hadn't seen since I was a child. "I was never as confused as everyone thought I was," she said. I stared at her. "What do you mean?" "I mean, I knew exactly what Richard was up to. The house visits, the nursing home research, the way he was poisoning your mother against me." She took a sip of her lemonade. "I'm 83, sweetheart, not stupid. But you seemed so confused that night. When I found you, I was cold and scared and hurt," she said firmly, "but I wasn't confused about what was happening. I knew your mother had promised to pick me up. I knew she'd decided not to come. I knew exactly what that meant." I felt my world tilt slightly. "Grandma, if you knew all that, why didn't you fight back? Why didn't you tell me?" She reached over and patted my hand with her weathered fingers. "Because I'm old, Emma. And sometimes being old means people stop listening to you. They stop believing you. They start making decisions for you whether you want them to or not." Her eyes were sharp and clear. But you saw what was happening. You believed me. You fought for me when I couldn't fight for myself. So you're saying, I struggled to process this. You're saying you knew I would find out? That I would do something about it? I'm saying I raised your mother better than the woman she became, but I raised you exactly right. She squeezed my hand. And I'm saying that sometimes, when you can't get justice for yourself, you have to trust that the people who love you will get it for you. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the neighborhood kids ride their bikes and listening to Mrs. Henderson watering her garden next door. Do you regret it? Grandma asked eventually. What you did to your mother? I considered the question seriously. Mom had tried to reach out several times over the past months, but our conversations never went well. She wanted me to forgive and forget, to move past this unpleasantness and restore the family peace. She wanted me to pretend that Christmas night had never happened. But every time I looked at Grandma, really looked at her, saw how small and vulnerable she was, remembered how she'd looked sitting in that snow, I felt the same cold fury all over again. No, I said finally. I don't regret it. She made a choice, Grandma. She chose to let someone convince her that you were disposable. She chose to value her new husband's comfort over your safety. She chose to abandon you. I turned to look at her. I just made sure there were consequences for that choice. And Richard? I smiled, and I know it wasn't a nice smile. Richard learned that actions have consequences. He wanted to treat you like you were nothing, like your life and dignity didn't matter. Now he gets to live with everyone in town knowing exactly what kind of man he is. The civil suit had settled out of court for a substantial sum, enough to ensure that Grandma would never have to worry about money for the rest of her life, enough to pay for the best home care when she needed it, enough to guarantee that she could stay in her beloved house for as long as she wanted. Richard's business never recovered. Last I heard, he and Mom had moved to another state, trying to start over somewhere nobody knew their story. Do you miss her? Grandma asked softly. Your mother? I thought about it honestly. Did I miss the woman who had raised me? Or did I miss the idea of her, the mother I'd thought she was before she showed me who she really was? I miss who I thought she was, I said finally. But I don't miss who she turned out to be. She could change, you know, Grandma said gently. People can change. Maybe. I stood up and stretched, feeling the day's warmth settling into my bones. But she'd have to want to change first. She'd have to admit that what she did was wrong. She'd have to choose differently. And if she did? I looked down at this woman who had loved me unconditionally, who had taught me what loyalty and family really meant, who had trusted me to fight for her when she couldn't fight for herself. Then maybe we could talk, I said. But it would be her choice to make. As the sun set that evening, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, I realized that I wasn't angry anymore. The cold fury that had sustained me through months of planning and plotting had melted away, replaced by something calmer, but no less resolute. I had protected someone who couldn't protect herself. I had stood up for what was right, even when it cost me. I had made sure that cruelty had consequences. And most importantly, I had learned the difference between the family you're born into and the family you choose to keep. Sitting on that porch with Grandma Rose, watching the world settle into evening peace, I knew I had chosen correctly. Some people might call what I did revenge, but I preferred to think of it as justice served cold as a December night, as cold as the snow that had nearly claimed the most important person in my world, as cold as the hearts of people who could abandon their own family when it became inconvenient to love them. And sometimes, that's exactly the temperature justice deserves to be served at.